Hello, my name is Bridget Manning. I am part of Newport County Prevention Coalition's No Wrong Door Mental and Behavioral Health Initiative. And I'm here today to present to you our rebranded, redesigned, updated campaign to change direction. What I wanted to share with you guys today is the work that we have done here at Newport County Prevention to update the initiative, which will go into the background. And really, my hope is that you walk away today um, understanding that mental health is something that needs to be addressed in our schools, can be addressed without creating a lot of more work for educators, especially, and people working with youth. Just a little bit about me. I came here working for Newport County Prevention in 2022. And before that, I actually was an eighth grade English language arts teacher in Massachusetts. Um, Part of my time in the classroom was focused, well, I will say a majority of my decision to leave the classroom had to do with what I saw as an increasing mental health crisis amongst our youth. Um, and personally, I felt driven to address more of the behavioral mental health needs of our youth. And I think that the campaign to change direction is a place for us to start. Just keep that in mind that the initiative was redesigned and updated with kind of a eighth grade English language arts lesson design perspective. Although I think you'll see as we move through the initiative that the content can be easily adapted to high school, even college age students. Although I will say that I wouldn't introduce this content at the elementary level just yet, and I think you'll see why as we move our way through. Okay, what is the campaign to change direction? I think if you have had any sort of affiliation with Newport County Prevention Coalition, you may have already heard of the campaign to change direction. Some of our local school systems actually took on this initiative way back in 2013. So the campaign itself was launched as part of Sandy Hook Promise, which was a direct response to, of course, the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. So the campaign Change Direction is a collaboration of concerned citizens, mental health leaders, educators, youth who have come together to change the way we talk about mental health. Um, the campaign itself in 2013 consisted primarily of what you see there with the faces. So the campaign focused on helping youth be able to recognize what the campaign refers to as signs of emotional distress. And then also, once noticing those signs, encouraging them to implement self-care and support strategies, not just for other people, for themselves as well. Now, a lot of time has passed since 2013. So part of my role here at Newport County Prevention Coalition was to take that initial campaign and to update it. Part of my work here has been as a mental health first aid instructor, both for adults and for adults working with youth. A lot of the training that my colleague and myself had to complete in order to become a trainer really opened my eyes to more current data research concerning mental health, substance misuse, the impact on youth. So I think taking all those things into consideration, this rebrand or relaunch, as we're calling it now in 2024, for me personally, married those two things. So I took that initial campaign of recognizing signs and symptoms and updated it with current information that we know now about mental health, what works, helping kids recognize stigma and dispel common misconceptions. So you'll see as we make our way through the campaign today that the initial point and purpose of the campaign is still there. What's changed is really delving into those signs and symptoms and helping kids recognize how they can support each other. Okay, so a little more specific on the updated curriculum. We started working on this in 2022. Like I said, the core of the campaign itself was already in existence. What I did on my end here is I updated the lesson plans to give them more structure, to put more of the active learning onto the youth. And to that end, I aligned each lesson with the Rhode Island health education standards. Although that does not mean the campaign is strictly applicable to Rhode Island youth. You can certainly use the campaign nationwide. But just for your purposes to understand is when I did the lesson design, I did align it to the Rhode Island education health standards. So other changes that were made, I modified the lessons with a middle school lens. Like I told you, that's what I know. So it's written with mostly a 6th through 8th grade lens, although the exercises and scenarios could certainly be updated. They're broad, general enough that high school students can work with them as well as college-age young adults. So the lessons themselves rely heavily on cooperative learning. We know that's how kids learn best. They learn best from each other. So you'll see, again, as we move through the slides, that there's a mix of activities to help kids talk to each other. Also, we rely on the facilitators to help guide the instruction, the discussions, and to really help kids feel confident with bringing this content out to their peers and to their communities as a whole. So in addition, depending on your purpose, the campaign to change direction, in addition to those core lessons, I've included a pre-evaluation as well as a post-evaluation for youth. Again, depending on your purposes, if you're interested in data, the evaluations will provide that for you. Additionally, there is a survey for students to complete. They can do so anonymously, again, just to give you an idea of, depending on your organization, if you want to show that growth. Now, as far as implementing the campaign itself, so there's really a lot of room for the way you could implement this within your organization or the school. I may slip into just saying schools because that's what I know, but certainly this campaign can be used summer camps, youth groups, you name it. Anywhere where there's kids, young adults, adolescents, campaign to change direction could likely suit your needs. So the first goal of the campaign is to introduce new knowledge, like I talked about earlier, is we know more about mental health, the impacts on youth, and then also what works as far as support. So the first goal is to identify the group of students not students, like the group of youth you'll be working with. So identify those kids and teach them the core content of the campaign, which is the 4 lessons. They'll work their way through activities. They will practice peer teaching strategies. And you can really take your time with this, although like I've been saying, it really is the core 4 lessons that can typically be taught within 30 to 40 minutes each. The second step, once you have that core group of kids, led by a facilitator, of course, that have the core understandings of the campaign, and really the power of the campaign, is that you take that group and you really help them deliver the content and the messaging to their peers, to their communities, whether that be the school at large, whether that be their church, wherever they're working out of, right? Because the power of the campaign is really in that peer teaching model. The peer teaching is effective because it allows kids, youth, to feel more comfortable asking questions. It really helps them foster their own critical thinking and problem-solving skills. And it helps them solidify the content by encouraging them and asking them how they can make that content relevant to their peers. So, and you can do this in a variety of ways. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll get into the actual toolkit, which will provide some peer teaching strategies for facilitators, because we know that's a lot to expect someone without an education background to be able to do. But generally speaking, the implementation should be, the end goal is really the peer teaching model, and however that looks like for your organization. Okay, so course overview. These are the 4 core lessons of the campaign. As I said earlier, they've each been aligned to the Rhode Island Health state standards. You've got some objectives there below. They can be taught in 30 to 40 minutes. You could likely expand each one of these lessons to an hour, hour and a half, if you need to fill that time. But these are the core lessons to the campaign. So this is what you would be teaching to your core group, your target group. So lesson 1. Lesson 1 is what I call, what is mental health? So through lesson 1, we help kids define and differentiate certain terms that they may use or have used around mental health concerns, mental health disorders. We help kids understand stigma, what stigma is, and how it can potentially keep people from accessing recovery services. Lesson 2. Lesson 2 is called Understanding Signs and Symptoms, and it's exactly what it sounds like. So through lesson 2, we help kids talk about, recognize common signs and symptoms of mental health concerns. We walk them through physical injuries versus mental health challenges. We help them kind of make that connection between how do we support someone with a physical injury versus how we support somebody with a mental health challenge. We also will emphasize in lesson 2 that common signs and symptoms of mental health concerns don't always indicate a mental health concern, so I think that's an important piece to it. Lesson 3 is about providing support and reassurance. So you'll see these build off each other. So once we, in lesson 1, ground the language and the understanding. Lesson 2, we dive in deeper with specific signs and symptoms. And then by lesson 3, we're helping kids understand how they can provide reassurance to their peers. Because the truth is, if you've ever been in a school or you have children or you work with kids, very often their friends and the people closest to them are the ones who recognize changes, concerns, potential issues before the adults in their lives. So the more we can really instill that confidence in kids that they can provide that initial support, that's the power of the program. So lesson 3 is the longest of the 4 because we really want kids to understand, yes, they can support one another, but we also, the second part of lesson 3, which you'll see, also has kids apply those skills to themselves. So the way they talk to themselves, the way they respond to their own conflicts. And then finally, lesson 4, we pull this all together and we have the students work on their own personal wellness plan, which is based on SAMHSA's 8 dimensions of wellness. We go through support strategies, self-care strategies that they can implement, again, not just for other people, but probably more importantly for themselves. So, what I'm going to do now is walk you through the 4 lessons. We will talk about the toolkit at the end of the presentation, but I just want to let everyone know ahead of time that throughout the slides, you're going to see activities. And when the slides cue you to an activity, for example, if you look at the bottom right-hand side of this slide, activity 1.1. The activities for each lesson can be done through group discussion. If you're in a time crunch, like I said, you could do these lessons in 30 minutes to 40 minutes, depending on your needs. However, once we launch our Campaign to Change Direction Toolkit, there will be activity sheets for the kids. So wherever you see an activity with a number next to it, you can think in your brain that we are going to have a nice worksheet, activity sheet for the kids to use. Now, based on your purposes, your organization, and your time, you can certainly do the activities informally just through discussion. I will caution that you should not skip any of the activities. The activities build on one another. Should you have individuals, youth, that choose not to participate because they're uncomfortable, that's okay. We're not going to force kids to do all the activities, but I think we really want to encourage each participant to complete all the activities to the best that they can, right? Because part of this is really engaging kids. So, what is mental health? Remember, this is lesson 1. So, lesson 1 focuses a lot on just creating a shared mental health literacy for the kids. So, we walk them through definitions, right? You could have them brainstorm what is mental health. And so you walk them through the slides. Now, activity 1.1 is a turn and talk, which again, the toolkit will explain these instructional strategies for you, but it's also based on a video. So ideally, when you start lesson 1, you would walk the kids through the slide, play the video for them. The video is quick. It's about 4 minutes. 5 signs you're not taking care of your mental health. And then on the activity sheet, which again will be available to you in the toolkit, there's areas for kids to jot down their ideas. You'll see throughout the student activities, there's a lot of turn and talk, which is a partner-based teaching strategy. So it's where kids turn and talk to each other. We don't necessarily want to force them to share out if they don't want to. And again, if kids feel more comfortable doing these activities on their own, that's okay. We can respect that. But we do want to encourage them to actually do the activity. So once we have an understanding of what mental health is, we want to move into what mental health disorders are. Because I think too, with youth especially, when they hear mental health, they have a tendency to lean towards negative ideas and connotations. Kids will be I'm basing this off of my time as a classroom teacher, but they will be very quick to rattle off to you all the disorders they've heard of and the signs and the symptoms. And that's great because we want to access their prior knowledge. So anything kids want to share or offer, we want to encourage them to do that. But I would say for lesson 1, we really want to focus on direct instruction. So not so much of the share outs on lesson 1. So we want to establish the terms, right? So we want to establish mental health. Now it's mental health disorder to help kids differentiate the two. You'll see there's activity 1.2 at the bottom there. It's a quick think. Quick think means kids are working on their own. Again, there's a little space for them to jot down their ideas. And then to the facilitator's discretion, what I would do is when there's a quick think, you can open the floor and ask kids if they want to share. Okay. Again, quick think is done individually by themselves. They jot down their thoughts. You could do an informal share out. The turn and talk is exactly what it sounds like, which was the previous slide. Turn and talk, they're jotting down ideas and then they're talking to a partner. So activity 1.2 asks kids to start thinking about the way they respond to physical injuries versus how they currently respond to mental health issues, concerns, disorders. And again, this is good for adults too. It's just to help kids feel more comfortable talking about mental health. Because if we start with the physical issues, usually kids are very quick. They want to tell you their answers because they're more comfortable talking about physical problems. What we want them to get to is to really draw that connection between the physical problems, issues, and mental health, that they're really not all that different. And then that helps them be able to feel more confident, comfortable with how they would provide support, just like they would for a physical injury. So again, we're still talking about language. So we talked about mental health, what mental health is, what mental health disorders are. And then we want to use this all-encompassing term throughout the campaign, which is mental health concern. So it's a little different than a mental health disorder because it actually is what we call an umbrella term. So mental health concern includes diagnosed mental health disorders, but it also includes mental health issues or concerns which don't always indicate a mental health disorder. And again, we'll walk through and help kids get there. But just for your understanding, a mental health disorder is a mental health concern. But not every mental health concern means there's a mental health disorder. Because we don't want kids to start feeling like they have all these issues or that they're diagnosing themselves and their friends. That's certainly not the goal here, right? But it's to help them feel more comfortable with talking about these things. So it's easier to say to someone, if we want to give kids the language to talk about these things, it's if they have a mental health concern, they can voice that, right? And it alleviates some of that stigma that might come with mental health. So it's kind of a square and rectangle thing, but a mental health concern includes mental health disorders, but not just mental health disorders. So activity 1.3, again, I'm probably going to keep saying this, but just to remind you, whenever you see the little number in the hands, that means there's a place in the workbook, there's a worksheet where kids can work on these activities, okay? So activity 1.3, I'll actually show you both slides because they go in tandem. So it expands on this correlation that we want kids to make between physical injuries and mental health issues. And again, it's to help them feel more comfortable that they can provide support. Because I think when youth especially, when they see a peer with some sort of injury, they are very quick to want to help for the most part. We want them to feel that way when they can tell something might be going on with somebody around them that is internal, right? So we have them work through the physical injury with our friend Isaiah here. What are some ways we could support Isaiah? And then we have them do the same thing with Abby. But the difference is with Abby is that you can't see her injury, right? So we're reinforcing the importance of supporting people and being able to have those conversations, even if it's a difficulty or an injury that you can't see, which is most of the mental health concerns that I think youth are seeing and witnessing. So the same idea, what are some ways you could support Abby? And then the facilitator would walk them through a compare and contrast. Ideally, I think what you'll find is a lot of the same answers for Isaiah and Abby, which is of course where we want the kids to get, right? That a lot of the support that they are able to provide for physical injuries, they can also provide for mental health concerns. So stigma, more about language. Stigma has a lot to do with some of the misconceptions that the youth you're working with could have regarding mental health. We want to make sure that all of our participants have a solid understanding of what stigma is. So I've given you a nice definition here. It's a set of negative or unfair beliefs that a society or group of people have about something. For our purposes, we want to guide the kids to understand the stigma surrounding mental illness, although this is certainly an opportunity in the program where kids might bring up other examples of stigma. I did not include an activity on this, but I think if and when it does come up, I do think it's valuable. Because again, some of these terms are unfamiliar to kids, but I think once you start explaining them, and especially asking them for examples, they're going to recognize they understand more than they think they do. So we want to encourage them to make connections where they can, even if it's not specific to mental health. So activity 1.4 expands on stigma. This is where we want to really get the kids to start thinking about some more abstract ideas, right? So we're pulling together these terms. Why do you think people may be hesitant to discuss mental health concerns they're experiencing? So now we've covered the language. They know what a mental health concern is. They should understand stigma. We want to put it back on the kids because direct instruction is great, but I think the power is when you can help kids feel confident in the things they already know. They already understand these things. They just don't have the language for it necessarily. So that's our role. Activity 1.4, continue. What are some ways we can decrease mental health stigma? Again, we're asking the kids to think outside the box, because again, with mental health, I think there is this saturation of all the negative things about mental health, right? Of all the disorders and all the negative consequences. And asking kids to think about mental health in a positive lens is really different for them. So this might take them some time, but we want to give them time to really work collaboratively and think about these things. So see what they come up with, activity 1.4. And then we've got some examples here to help support ending stigma. Education, compassion, talk openly, words matter. So these suggestions are not the only ways. Certainly if kids are coming up with their own examples, I would be open to suggestions, but especially if you've got a hesitant group, or if you've got some kids that maybe don't know each other and they're hesitant to share out, they're stuck, they're not answering, you can pose the question and then basically here are the answers for them. But you want to see if they can get there on their own. And then activity 1.5, you're going to find that each activity ends with a true or false section. Again, because you see the little activity 1.5, there is a space for it on the worksheet. However, you can do this as a real quick thumbs up, thumbs down activity. The other strategy you could do with this, although I didn't do this in the workbook, but I do think it's effective, is especially with older kids, high school kids, college kids, taking this to the next level and not just doing a true or false, but asking them to make the false statements true. So, and I realize a lot of this stuff is, it sounds like a lot of work, but once our toolkit's going to be accessible online. And a lot of these teaching notes and suggestions that I'm making here verbally for you will be available in writing, so you have it. So you don't feel like I'm just throwing all these things at you and you're never going to see it again. Okay, so this moves us into lesson 2. Lesson 2 delves into understanding the signs and symptoms of mental health concerns. So we start this lesson by breaking down for participants the difference between signs and symptoms. They may already have some background knowledge on this. So again, if kids have accurate information and they want to share it, I would say encourage that, allow them. Any connections they can make to previous content and learning is to their benefit. So activity 2.1 asks kids to come up with common signs that they may see if an individual was having a bad day or having some sort of physical ailment. I gave the example of a stomach ache here. I'm going to move forward quickly just because these are on the same activity. The second part of this activity asks kids to then move on to symptoms. So again, what are common symptoms they might see if someone was having a bad day? And then what are some symptoms they might see if someone was having a stomach ache? Now, the power in this activity is that it's helping kids really differentiate between what a sign is versus a symptom, but they're doing it through examples that at this point they're likely more comfortable with. They're not talking about themselves, they're talking about a hypothetical person who's just having a bad day or having a common stomach ache. So again, it is helping them talk about potentially vulnerable topics, but you're doing it in a way that they're not talking about themselves, and it eases them into that. So once you have the kids identify some of those common signs and symptoms, we want to move into and help them draw the parallel between signs and symptoms of physical ailments or any sort of emotional distress. I call it having a bad day, or it could just mean circumstantial, right? So we want to help kids start to categorize where they might see signs and symptoms if someone around them is struggling either because of a temporary situation, a physical ailment like a stomach ache, or a mental health concern, because really those signs and symptoms, the common ones, are going to be very, very similar. And I think the kids will see that as you start to talk about these things. So the common signs and symptoms that we want to guide kids to recognize likely are going to fall under one of these 4 categories: behavior and actions, thoughts, appearance, feelings, and emotions. Now, the other part to lesson 2 is, and this is where the direct instruction is really important, because we want to guide the participants to understand that even though there's a lot of overlap between those signs and symptoms, right? If it's a physical issue like a stomach ache, or, a bad breakup or a fight with a friend, or a legitimate mental health concern, it can feel overwhelming, right? Because there's a lot of overlap. And it's on the facilitator to be very direct about this, that not all signs and symptoms of mental health concerns mean it's a mental health concern. So how are kids going to determine how to help each other and what's going on with each other? Well, in order to support someone else, they need to feel comfortable having that conversation. And that's really the rest of the lessons, is helping kids feel confident in supporting not just each other, but themselves too. So when we talk about the 5 signs, these are signs and symptoms, common signs and symptoms of mental health concerns. The campaign to Change Direction, way back when in 2013, identified these as changes in personality, agitation, withdrawal, poor self-care, and hopelessness. Now, activity 2.2 is going to take some time, but it's worthwhile, because what kids are going to do is they are going to compare and contrast a classmate, Tyler, who has a physical injury, with a classmate, Audrey, who seems to be having some sort of mental health concerns, or she's showing signs of it. Now, we've had kids do this already, right, in activity 1. But where activity 2.2 is going to differ is we're asking participants to break down these signs. They're going to tell you what a personality change would look like. What does agitation look like? What does withdrawal look like? What does poor self-care look like? What does hopelessness look like? What does it look like in someone who's going through a physical injury versus what might that look like in someone who's experiencing some sort of emotional distress? And again, it's on the facilitator to emphasize, and I think this activity will really help kids understand, despite the signs and symptoms having a lot of overlap, they don't always indicate a mental health concern. So again, we want to guide kids to feel comfortable asking questions, but we don't want to steer them in the wrong direction where they are diagnosing each other. So just like lesson plan 1, lesson plan 2 ends with the true or false. Again, if you have the time, or you're working with older youth, I would suggest taking this a step further and asking the kids to make the false statements true. Okay, lesson 3. Lesson 3 is the most time-consuming of the lessons, because this is where we want kids spending a majority of their time really starting to think about how they can provide support and reassurance for each other, right? Because lessons 1 and 2 help them better understand what mental health concerns look like, what some common signs and symptoms are, and then lesson 3 is going to give them the tools to provide support and reassurance, not only for each other, but for themselves as well. So just as a reminder, at the end of lesson 2, we delve into each one of the 5 signs in depth. Participants will do that through activity 2.2. But we like to remind them, of course, what are the 5 signs? Well, for our purposes, they are personality change, agitation, withdrawal, poor self-care, and hopelessness. Activity 3.1. So activity 3.1 has a couple parts to it. Again, the toolkit will break down on the sheet for the students what each piece of this looks like. But like I told you earlier with the quick think is going to be done individually. Often when I give you a quick think, when I give you, when I cue students for a quick think, it means they're thinking independently. So just keep in mind for quick thinks, the topics could be vulnerable. You don't ever want to force kids, youth, anyone really to share if they don't want to share. But this quick think asks kids to think about a time that someone else helped them overcome a difficult situation. So again, we're using what the kids already know. Use their prior knowledge. That's the power. If they can connect the new knowledge to the old knowledge, that's learning. We're making it relevant to them. So you give them some time for the quick think, and then you move into a turn and talk. Like we talked about in lesson 1, a turn and talk is exactly what it sounds like. They are jotting down ideas, and then they're going to turn and talk to a partner. I did make a note on this. Just a general tip. I would, when you know you're going to ask kids to share with a partner, I would let them know ahead of time. It might change what they write about. But I did add here that participants do not need to use specific names or details. So to help guide their turn and talk, I've cued questions at the bottom. Essentially, this activity, like I said, is a little time consuming, but it does get the kids to start connecting ways they've been provided support and reassurance, which is going to help them connect to strategies that they can now implement themselves. And again, it's really empowering them to understand that they already know what it looks like when someone is providing support. We want to help them be able to do that for each other. So what is reassurance? Back to the language piece. We want to make sure we all have an understanding. It's creating mental health literacy. So reassurance is a statement, a comment, an action that serves as a reminder to another person struggling that they are not alone. Reassurance reminds others they can get the support they need and that resources are available to them. This is another short video. It's from Psych2Go, which is a pretty good account for your participants who are interested in the mental or behavioral health fields. They have little videos. They're usually less than 5 minutes that go through some current topics in mental health that I think kids will be interested in. This clip in particular, I chose it for activity 3.2 because it gives kids specific things they can say to someone else. Now, the video says in pain. Now, generally speaking, at this point in the campaign, I think most kids are going to understand that this is meant to help them apply to situations where their peers seem to be struggling with something mentally. So it gives them actual specific things to say. So there's a quick think place where, can be done individually, where we're asking kids to think about reassurance. And now that they have an understanding of what it is, how can reassurance help other people? So again, we are having kids work with hypothetical scenarios. So I kept these very general so that you could use them with the middle school lens, high school, college. It's asking kids to, now that they've heard examples, they know what reassurance is, they've heard some concrete examples of it, we want to give them some time to come up with their own examples. And they will do that through activity 3.3. So we take this a step further, and we're still sticking with the scenario for 3.2. But what we've done here is to give kids examples to help them better understand generally what reassurance is meant to do, what it should sound like, and what it doesn't sound like. So you can have kids, if you want to have a student take one column, have another kid take the second column, and if you read them in tandem back and forth, you'll really hear the difference between what effective supportive reassurance sounds like versus what it doesn't sound like. Part of why I included this is, as we know, kids have learned in a diverse ways. Again, there's a lot of quick writes in this, but we want to make sure when we have those opportunities to really diversify how we're teaching the content. This is one. We also have not just visual learners, right? We have kids that need to hear it. So this is helpful. And then this last slide here for support and reassurance pulls together generally what reassurance should sound like. Ideally, you would want the kids to be able to tell you these, to tell you these concepts. They could probably get there if you keep this chart up and you ask them, hey, what does this sounds like column have in common? These are the ideas that you want kids to come up with. It takes time because, again, you're not providing the instruction directly. You want them to get there, so you have to be patient, but they can do it. They can do it. If not, you always have these slides to rely on that essentially will give you what you're looking for, especially if you're in a time crunch. Activity 3.5 is starting to get into not just the reassurance of things you can say, but what are things we can do. The power in this activity, and I'll go through a couple because they're separate slides, but on the activity sheet itself, you'll see 3.5, it's under the same activity. So this activity asks kids for ways they can check in with each other. So now that we've gone over common signs and symptoms, we want kids to feel more comfortable talking to each other when they notice these signs and symptoms. And then the next step would be, what can they do? Well, what does checking in look like? What does engaging with others look like? But if you look closely at the activities for each strategy, each participant is asked to apply the strategy both for others and then secondly, what that would look like for themselves. And then like all the other lessons, we end with a true or false segment. So again, kids can do thumbs up, thumbs down. You can modify statements for your more advanced kids, but this is a real quick, informal way to check in. Okay, and finally, lesson 4 pulls the previous 3 lessons together. So lesson 1, we were talking about language, mental health. Lesson 2, we're having kids determine common signs and symptoms that they are already likely aware of. They just don't know they're aware of them. Lesson 3 has kids really work in depth with strategies they can apply both to their peers and themselves. And then lesson 4, we want to get our participants time to work on their own self-care strategies and come up with their own personal wellness plan, which again is based off of SAMHSA's 8 dimensions of wellness. So we want to remind the kids of the 5 signs. Activity 4.1, I've included a clip here to help kids make sure that we all have the common understanding of what we mean when we say wellness. I think especially when it comes to mental health and young people, we assume that they know what these things mean. And that's why I think it's important throughout the campaign to take time to establish definitions for these things: mental health disorder, stigma, wellness. So this activity is going to give kids a shared understanding of what we mean when we say wellness. They can watch the video. It walks them through the 8 dimensions of wellness. And then we ask them to think about actions people can use to improve their well-being, and then also to identify some of the risk-taking behaviors that they may see. And then this slide will clarify a little more in depth of what wellness is. The most important things we want our participants to recognize is that everyone's wellness plan is going to look different. What works for one person is not necessarily going to work for someone else. And that's really the fun part of it, is whatever wellness is to you is determined by you. So we want to make sure that we're honoring the healthy things kids already do, but then also giving them space to think about things that they can incorporate into their lives. If there's time for it, I do think it's valuable to encourage kids to share their ideas if they want. I'm always surprised by how many new resources, strategies, podcasts, books that I learn about just from allowing kids, giving them the space to share. So again, we want to go back to some of those healthy habits. In activity 3, we had kids looking at engaging with other people and checking in on each other and themselves. So activity 4 is taking that a step further. We're talking more about the self-care. What does self-care look like for you at home, at school, during your free time? And then what does relaxation look like for you? Same thing, at home, at school, free time. Just to remind our participants, generally speaking, we pull all 5 habits together: taking care, checking in, engaging, relaxing. One of the last activities we have kids do is activity 4.3, where they're going to sit down and create their own personal wellness plan. They're going to pull everything that they've learned together and brainstorm healthy behaviors, habits, and activities that they currently do for each one of those 8 dimensions, and then also things that they can implement. This is an activity that kids can do individually, although at this point in the campaign, by lesson 4, we would hope kids are a little more comfortable with each other. This is also a great opportunity to let them bounce ideas off each other and to remind them that their wellness plan is not going to look the same as their peers, because we are individuals. Last part, just like lessons 1 through 3, lesson 4 is going to end with a real quick true or false based on wellness and what the kids have learned. And we want to reiterate not just the 5 signs, but also the 5 habits of emotional well-being. We want to encourage kids to check in on each other, to engage with others where they can, to take care of themselves, and then also to relax. Now, just to remind you that this last slide here, knowing the 5 signs, up to this point, you should have been working with a small group of students, targeted students. If you already have a peer support group in place at your organization, that'd be a good place to start. But you want kids to take this core content that you see here, the 5 signs, and then the self-care strategies or the healthy habit strategies, and you want them to own these and then take what they've learned and disperse it out to the wider audience, whether that be their school, their peers, the community, church, if it's a youth group. We want kids to feel confident in what they've taken the time to learn, and then to make that relevant to potentially a younger audience. If you have 8th graders who really master this, the power is then how do they make this relevant to a 5th grade audience or a 6th grade audience? And the more opportunities we can find for kids to do that, the more this knowledge and content is going to really sink in, and they'll be able to apply it and understand it. So, I want to thank everyone for their attention today. I know there's a lot of information here. We will have a toolkit available for download on our website at strategicprevention.org/CTCD toolkit. You'll need an email address to download, and we will keep you updated on any changes that we make to the slides, to the content, to the program. This toolkit will be launching this first week in March, so starting March 4th through the 8th. What you see on the slide in front of you is what is available in the toolkit. You can read through on your own, but the most important thing I want to ensure you that will be included in the toolkit is we have facilitator resources. We want educators, facilitators, anyone taking this on to work with youth. We want it to be accessible to people, not just in the educational field. And to that end, the toolkit will include answer keys for facilitators as well as teaching notes, so that you have in writing and in place a lot of these strategies, tips that I've been including for you here today. We want you to have those in writing. Additionally, going forward, we will be launching both Spanish versions and Portuguese, although they're not available just yet. If you sign up to download this toolkit, the initial launch, the English version, and you give us your email, you will be updated when we have those other versions available. So again, I want to thank everyone for their attention today. We're really excited about this project. It's something that we've been working on diligently, and we want to make this accessible, easy for adults to facilitate and to see the impact that it can have within our community. So I thank you for your attention today. And if you have any further questions, suggestions, concerns, you can email me. It's Bridget Manning. My email is bmanning@riprevention.org.